It's such a rich book that I think we can't go any further in pursuing individual strands within it. I think one must just hope that some of the people listening to the discussion will be prompted by it to go off and have a look at it for themselves. I think we must move on now to the later dialogues of Plato. And when we do, when the move from the middle to the late period of Plato's output shows us another change of character again. Suddenly the dialogues become less literary, dramatic, colourful, etc., and rather more what we might call academic or analytic. Why is that?
In my view, they're not actually less dramatic. What happens is that all the effort of irony and imagery that in previous works went into depicting the people undertaking the discussion, that's all now going to the ideas and arguments themselves. And very often it's ideas and arguments that are familiar to us from Plato's own earlier works, like the Republic or the Phaedo. Plato, I mean, one of the extraordinary things about Plato, and he may have been the first writer in history to be able to do this, is he built up a relationship with his readers such that when writing one work, he can take it for granted that his readers have read his previous works. He can surprise them, he can make allusions, he can build up resonances through that. And what he most of all does with that is conduct a sort of public self-scrutiny of his own earlier ideas, relying on us, the readers, to know what they are, but saying, so to speak, don't get too enthused by the Phaedo and the Republic. It was all very fine stuff, I know, but these truths, if they were, are no good to you or to me if we can't defend them against criticism. And maybe they weren't truths anyway. Maybe they were all wrong. So let's take a few of them and subject them to really hard analytical criticism.
Now, if you had to single out one of these later dialogues for particular mention, which would you choose?
Well, the prime example is the Parmenides, where the tables are turned on Socrates. Socrates puts forward the theory of forms as he stated it in the Phaedo, and is unmistakably the Phaedo. There are various verbal connections with the Phaedo that Plato clearly expects his reader to pick up and say to himself, gosh, the Socrates of the Phaedo is now on the receiving end of the questions. And in fact, old Parmenides, who is talking to Socrates in this dialogue, produces a series of objections and criticisms of the theory of forms, which many philosophers from Aristotle onwards have thought were quite devastating. And Plato doesn't tell us the answer. He produces the criticisms, and you're left to decide for yourself whether they're fair, unfair, and if they're fair, what you're to do about the theory of forms.
One of the dialogues, which some people think is late, others think is one of the middle period ones, that doesn't matter, which stands aside from the rest, is the Timaeus, isn't it? Partly because it actually contains more cosmology and science than it does philosophy, but mostly, I think, because it also contains a wonderfully poetic creation myth, not dissimilar, actually, to the one in the book of Genesis that I think we're all familiar with. Now, why did Plato do that? I mean, what I have in mind in asking the question is this. Do you think, for example, he believed it literally, in the way one must assume, I suppose, that the ancient Hebrews literally believed in the book of Genesis?
I myself think he did not believe it literally. The question was controversial in ancient times, but Plato's closest associates took the view that Plato presented a narrative of the divine craftsman imposing order on chaos, meaning this to be a vivid way of presenting an analysis of what he took to be the fundamental constituents of the whole universe. He wanted to see the entire universe as a product of order imposed on disorder, and particularly mathematical order, and that, of course, is something very different from Genesis. The divine craftsman is embodying, above all, mathematical intelligence in the world at large.
So it's a poetic way of explaining the intelligibility of the world, which has been a mystery for people, actually, from the earliest times until now.
Right, and of course, such a general proposition as the proposition that the whole universe is the product of imposing order on disorder isn't a proposition that you can prove either in general or in its vast detailed ramifications, and Plato is very well aware of this, and that's another aspect, I think, for another reason why he puts it forward as a myth, but a myth which is the guiding inspiration of something that Plato was very serious about. That's a research program in which he enlisted at the academy all the leading mathematicians of his day. Every advance in mathematical astronomy, mathematical harmonics, even a medical theory which shows disease and health to be a matter of the proportions between the constituent elements in the body, each such step forward is a further proof of something Plato cared deeply about, the idea that mathematical regularities and harmonies and proportions are what explain things, and these mathematical harmonies and proportions are, for Plato, the prime examples of goodness and beauty. So really, this is a vision for a scientific research program which is to show that goodness and beauty are the fundamental explanatory factors in the world at large.
What you're saying now makes me wonder how all this ties up with the Republic. Because when you were talking about the Republic a few minutes ago, one of the things you stressed was that that is, in a sense, a complete philosophy. Well, now, how does what Plato is saying in the Timaeus fit into that apparently already complete philosophy?
Well, I think it fits it like a hand fits into a glove, in that what you have in the Republic is a sketch of a program for a scientific, above all a mathematically scientific understanding of nature, which Plato begins to carry out or do his share of in the Timaeus. And indeed, it's the Timaeus which people went to as the statement of Plato's philosophy for a very long time, and it's really only a more recent development which has taken the Republic to be the work of Plato that you go and read. For a long time it was the Timaeus.
So what you're saying is that all that cosmology and science in the Timaeus, or you say Timaeus, I say Timaeus, taught in different schools, all that cosmology and science is the working out in practice of possibilities that were canvassed in the Republic.
Yes, and the Timaeus presents itself dramatically in its introduction as a continuation, in some sense, of the discussion in the Republic.
Yeah.
And what's more, this research program, as I called it, that's announced in the Republic as to how astronomy should be done, how mathematical harmonics should be done, was actually done. And behind that academic research program is, that is the starting point of many of the very greatest achievements of Greek mathematical science, down to the astronomy of Ptolemy. Ptolemy's astronomy is the ultimate descendant of the astronomy that was done in the academy by these leading mathematicians that Plato gathered together there to show us a world where mathematical order is the governing principle that's the most important, must feature most importantly in your science. And since mathematical order is the expression for Plato of goodness and beauty, these sciences, which show us the world as it is, objectively speaking, are simultaneously sciences of value. And that's how the metaphysical aspects of the Republic, this knowledge that the philosophers are to learn, can simultaneously be the foundation for a radical new kind of politics, because what the philosophers are learning before they come to rule the rest of us are sciences of value as well as fact.
Another of the dialogues, another of the later dialogues that you yourself have a particular reputation for knowing about in the academic world is the Theaetetus. Why have you specialized in that?
Because I find it endlessly exciting, and I've never plumbed to the bottom. Every time I go back to it, there seems to be more to discover about it. And I think many philosophers have found this is the dialogue that Leibniz translated, Berkeley wrote quite a lot about, Wittgenstein quoted, This is a dialogue which other philosophers have always found stimulating.
What's it about?
The question is, what is knowledge? And it's a large-scale exercise of the kind of Socratic discussion that went on in the earlier dialogues, but on a much bigger, grander scale. 3 answers are given. Knowledge is perception, knowledge is true judgment, knowledge is true judgment together with an account. Each of those answers is knocked down in true Socratic style. We're not told what Plato thinks knowledge is at the end, but we have learnt such an enormous amount about the problem and about the ramifications of the problem that we go away feeling the richer rather than the poorer.